And it's my pleasure to welcome Sheila Pinkel here from Los Angeles. As you know, she is a professor and artist teaching at Pomona College, and she's actually on her way to give a talk and an exhibit at Vassar College in New York. And I'm so pleased that she was able to stop in Chicago and share some of her work with us. And because she's going to focus on only one aspect of it, I just thought to give you a little more sense of the depth of her involvement with art making and activism. I would tell you a couple of the things she's done during this past year. She completed a mural about the Native American relationship to nature, 32 feet by 5 foot commission from the city of Los Angeles for the Sherman Oaks Public Library. So if you are in the vicinity of Sherman Oaks, check it out. It's a permanent installation there. And she's currently working on a gate, which I'm very curious about, for a park in South Central Los Angeles. It must be another commission. And also an installation about the prison industrial complex for an exhibition at California Polytechnic University in Pomona. And next fall, she will be on sabbatical, completing, during that time, hoping to complete a book on the Hmong people, who she'll be talking about today, and the aftermath of the Indochina Wars. Sheila's a longtime cherished friend and colleague, and I'm just delighted to welcome her. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther, so much for inviting me to come and speak today. And it's extraordinary to be here. I was teaching as a replacement for Esther about 20 years ago here, so I feel like I've just come back home. And so many friends who I cherish are in the audience, and I'm so delighted that you're all here today. Esther asked if I would talk about the aspect of my work that has to do with documentary explorations. And when I think back on the work that I've done in the last 20 years, a great deal of the work has to do with my own concerns about social space and my desire to comment on and reflect on what's occurring in that social space. And I realize that when I think back on the work that I've done, that a lot of the work is my attempt to try to make visible things that are hard to see. And so I've actually recently realized that I could call all of my work sight unseen with different suffixes to describe some of the areas that I have wanted to make visible during that period of time. And so I'm only going to show the work that is in that area of my exploration. And I think maybe we could, yeah. And I'm just going to try to go through this. I hope that I haven't, if I am overwhelming you, then I'll kind of quit. But I'm going to take you through a lot of the work that I've done in the last 20 years to show you how I've tried to stay true to my own desire to better understand the world and to reflect what I have understood as a result of the research that I've done. In the early 1980s, I became increasingly concerned about the growth of the military-industrial complex in the United States and thought that I was concerned because I was ignorant, and if I simply learned something more about it, I would actually feel better. So I began to research that subject and discovered that I was getting more paranoid rather than less, and that was a big subject and that I needed to really do a lot of research. So I started contacting all manner of organizations and institutions to try to find out more, and ultimately had to go to alternative sources to really learn about it. Ended up making 13 thermonuclear gardens that were information artworks about the growth of the military and the extent to which we arm foreign countries in in the United States. And so this is the very first one I made. It was at a place in Laguna Beach called BC Space. It consisted of takeout food containers which had the names of military contractors which sold things to foreign countries. It had maps, periodicals. It had artworks that I did that were about this, that were images rather than text. So that was one. Another one was at the USC Atelier in Santa Monica, and I tried to make each one of the installations site-specific. And so in this case, I put the military contractors in the city of Santa Monica, and the head of the planning commission saw the installation and remembered that bit of information that was way in the back of the installation. And when one of those military contractors came up to try to expand their facilities, she said that she wouldn't grant them that right because she knew that they were a major military contractor and she didn't support that in the city of Santa Monica. So they didn't get their grant. And I was impressed that that information could actually empower somebody, and then I continued to put local information whenever I did these. And every time I did them in a museum or gallery space, I got lots of feedback, but almost no criticism, and I had no trouble. But when I put this information in a group show in the foyer of the Federal Building in public space in downtown Los Angeles, something else happened, and I got a call that if I didn't remove my art within 24 hours, they were going to throw it away. And so it was and another instance happened actually here in Chicago when Artemisia Gallery had a project which they did with the MTA in which 20 women artists from around the United States were invited to make billboards in Chicago. And the MTA hadn't thought to look at what we were going to do before they allowed us to go ahead with the project, and then ultimately thought they better look at what we were going to do before they put up those billboards. And once they did, 9 of us out of the 20 were not allowed to complete our billboards. And I was proudly one of the 9 who wasn't. And again, what it meant to me is that that the gallery, the White Cube, is a landscape where we respond to information very differently than we do in the quote-unquote public space. And I got interested in what is the difference between the gallery museum space and public space. Why would this be censored in public space and allowed in private space of the gallery? Very interesting to me. So one of the images I had lots and lots of images in these installations. This is, I'm crunching an F-15 on a Xerox machine. And in one of them, I did the history of the nuclear industry. It was in Las Vegas, went to the nuclear test site outside of Las Vegas. And while I was doing the research for this, I saw that the United States, online, that the United States had just said that they were not going, they had permanently obligated themselves to a nuclear disarmament, which I was overjoyed with. And this was on May 16th, 1995. On June 17th, 1995, this next information appeared on Reuters, which was the Pentagon seeks to resume underground nuclear tests. So within a month, this all changed, and I got very interested in that phenomenon. So I made this was the 50th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima, and I was asked to make a commemorative poster for that. The sign that the poster that was supposed to go on a billboard was something like this. It had the text in hands. I've redone it since then. So this was the one that was not allowed to be produced. From all of that research, I began to do another series, and I'll only show you a few of those, that was called Consumer Research. And it came out of another problem that I had where I was invited to make a proposal to do a bus bench in Los Angeles by an alternative arts organization, and I proposed to put the definition of the word consumer on the bus bench, somebody who uses up, wastes, or destroys, because that's what the classical definition of the word consume or consumer is. And the alternative arts organization wrote me back and said that I couldn't do it because it would be too disturbing to have this definition on a bus bench. And I got very interested that the definition of the word we call ourselves would be too disturbing. And she said, and by the way, that's no longer the definition of the word consumer. And I went into I did research and discovered that, yes, as a matter of fact, somewhere in the 60s, the first definition that had been the classical definition for over 400 years of using up, waste, or destroys, that definition had been eliminated from the dictionaries, and it was the second definition, a person who uses goods or services to satisfy his needs rather than to resell them, a much softer and more palatable definition of the word consuming. So that in the 60s there was an exponential growth in consuming due to the growth in the power industry as a result of nuclear energy. And so because of that, I think that the response to that was the changing of that definition, which is very interesting to me. I also put that definition in the map of North America and Latin America because of our historic relationships, and played with the word consumer on the computer, and did this image that suggested itself while I was doing those other ones, realize, 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 and about who was being consumed and so on. So that was a few of the works that came out of that exploration over many, many years. I don't tend to just linearly do these, but they occur to me as I'm doing other things and having recognitions and beginning to understand the implications of ideas. So most of the things I do are more longitudinal. In 1989, after I'd done about 13 thermonuclear gardens, I went to a county fair in Northern California and found a Hmong booth, H-M-O-N-G. And the Hmong people are tribal peoples originally from Mongolia. They moved to China and lived there for 1,000 years, and then were expelled about 1800. And there was a diaspora of the Hmong through Laos, Burma, Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia. And so I bought a 5 by 10 foot embroidery quilt of the Hmong, by the Hmong, showing this diaspora, showing the Second Laotian War and what had happened to the Hmong in Laos, showing them going across the Mekong into Thailand and then going to third countries. I did not know anything about this, and so I went to Fresno to find out more about it from the people who had sold me the quilt, the embroidery, and they told me that there were 500,000 people in refugee camps in Thailand. And with all the research that I had done on the military-industrial complex and the aftermath of wars throughout the world, I had not read that there were 500,000 people in refugee camps in Thailand. So I decided on my next sabbatical to go there and try to understand the aftermath of the Indochina Wars. So I did go there, and there's these stories that happen when you do these long projects, and there's this one story and I could tell you millions of stories about any of these projects, but there's this one story that I think is valuable to tell because it was an odyssey to actually get into the camp. I decided to go to the camps for my sabbatical, and I had just been hired by Pomona College 3 years before. It was my very first sabbatical. I thought maybe I could get some grant money from the school, so I called up the head of the research committee and asked him if I could apply for a grant, and he said, well, yes, and it was 8 in the morning on a Thursday, and he said, yes. And I said, when is the research committee meeting again? And he said, well, at 9:30 this morning. So I said, what do I have to do? He says, well, you have to stratify a budget, describe what you're going to do, make 5 copies of what your proposal is, and give it to the committee. So between 8 and 9:30, I did it. And, so then I went to class and taught until 11 and got out of class and called him up and I asked him how the committee meeting went, and he said it went fine, and he said, you got your grant. Well, that was terrifying because now I might have to do this, you know? And now what was I going to do? So I called a friend who knew somebody who was the head of a Cambodian refugee organization in Southern California, and I went to see her, and she said, oh, it sounds like a great project, and you ought to do Vipassana meditation in addition while you're over there. And I had no idea what that was, but I thought that meditation meant that you could sit in one spot and space out for a real long time. And I was really tired, and that sounded like a great idea. So I said that I would do that. And she was amazed that I said I would do it so quickly. But then she called this Thai woman whose name was Mrs. Goldman, who was married to a Jewish doctor. And Mrs. Goldman came over to see me and to check out my studio and to make sure that I was on the up and up. And then she called a Buddhist monk in a temple in Los Angeles, who called a Buddhist monk in Bangkok, who called a woman, and he said to her that there was an American woman who was coming over to do meditation, and could she pick her up from the airport and pick me up and take me to her house and put me up for a few days. Now, I was not asking for this at all, and I didn't expect anyone to be at the airport at 1 in the morning after I got through customs, a complete stranger, and I got out of the airport, and yes, there they were with a sign with my name on it. Well, they took me to their house. I went to the American Embassy, who had assured me I could get into the camps, and applied for a camp pass. And then I did my Vipassana meditation for a week, got out of the meditation, went back to the American Embassy, found out I had been denied my camp pass because the Thai military didn't want Americans visiting those camps, and that's why I had never heard about them. So fortunately, I had made friends with my meditation teacher, and she had told me that I ought to get to know this political science professor at the Chulalongkorn University. So I called her, and she said to meet her. And so I did meet her the following day. She called, when she heard what I needed, she called Father Peter Sawang, who was a Buddhist, was a Catholic priest who was at St. Louis Hospital getting chemotherapy. And he had been the head of a Catholic Thai refugee organization. So I went to see him the next morning. When she called, he happened fortuitously to be in his room. The next morning I went to see him. We had a wonderful day together. He realized what I needed. The Thai Catholic organization had its main offices in that hospital. Normally it takes 2 to 3 months to see the director, but because he had been the former director, he got me an appointment that day. He applied for 5 camps for me to visit through COAIR, this Catholic organization, and within a week I had my camp pass and was on my way to the camps. So I'm telling you this very long, circuitous story because life happens in strange and unusual ways, and you just got to hang in there by your teeth if you really want to get something done. And sometimes it's some odyssey that, well, if I hadn't done meditation, I would have never gotten into the camps. So, and what I discovered is that that I had the subtext of Buddhism that was weaving their way through my experience. So I went to 3 Cambodian camps along the Thai-Cambodian border and 2 Hmong camps, and ultimately ended up doing 2 major projects that were part of a larger work that I called Indochina Document. And the one that I have on the screen right now is Remember Cambodia. And so this is the installation view of one of the exhibitions. I've showed it in a lot of different venues, but this was the first venue at Pomona College. And when I'm showing you these works because they were my attempt to document what I found as the reality for both Cambodian people and Hmong people as a result of the Indochina Wars. But I wanted to actually put them in a context, a cultural context, and all of the work that I'm showing you is the format is suggested by what I found in my research. I never knew what I was going to do until I'd done all the research and realized what it was that I was trying to say. So when I was doing these quote-unquote documentary projects, they often took a slightly undocumentary form, but with photos that I took embedded in other kinds of matrices. So for instance, I realized that the Cambodian culture was in peril because the Khmer Rouge had destroyed a great deal of the Cambodian cultural artifacts and temples and Buddhist effigies and so on. That one of the things that I wanted to do was to remind people of the tenacity and the quality of High Khmer culture, which is what the Cambodians are doing. And so I also got to know a Cambodian family who had immigrated to Los Angeles and owned a donut shop in Santa Monica. And so this family was supporting this huge extended family both in Los Angeles and in Cambodia by working day and night 7 days a week in this donut shop, and they lived in this two little room donut shop. They had tatami mats that they pulled out from under the counter. So I spent several days and nights photographing them working in the donut shop, and embedded in this image of Kali, that it's the goddess who has God who is trying to right the sacred mountain that has been tipped by war. And this God has multiple arms that is attempting to right that sacred mountain. And I felt that this family was attempting to right the mountain of their extended family that had been tipped by the war. So I thought it was an analogy between this family and that image. That the image comes from Angkor Wat. And so embedded in here are all these pictures of them making donuts, plus information about the history of the wars and the stories about their family, and a story about this goddess as well. And this is a huge, it's 60 by 72 inches. I tiled it out on my computer, which just had a regular small printer at the time. I also saw that in Long Beach, families were attempting to keep the culture alive by teaching their kids traditional Cambodian dance. And so embedded in an apsara image that was also on the walls of Angkor Wat, I put these photographs of the children learning these dances in an attempt to perpetuate the culture, because people were quite concerned that it would not continue. This one's hard to see, but it is about a war scene from Angkor Wat. And it seemed that my desire was to show people's response to cataclysm. And I had in the installation images from the refugee camps. I had a matrix of those single frame images, and I had a matrix of Tool Slang and the killing fields in Phnom Penh. But in these matrices, I wanted to show how people respond to cataclysm. And so I told 8 stories of 8 people that I had met in the process of doing all of this work. And I went to the refugee camps in 1990 and 1992, and went to Phnom Penh as well. And then I collected stories of Buddhist monks, of people who lived in the refugee camps, of an American photographer. I'll just tell you this one story on the lower right-hand side of the matrix. It's Doug Hulcher. And Doug was a photographer who I met in Phnom Penh, who was a teacher in Minneapolis. And he went to Thailand in the early 1980s and came back, and the Hmong community there said that he needed to help them get their children out of the Cambodian camps and the Hmong camps, but mainly Cambodian camps, and to get them back to them. And he discovered that there was a catch-22 in the law where the children were often separated from their families when the families were allowed to immigrate, and the children had no way of ever finding their families again. So for the subsequent 10 years after that, Doug, on his own with no funding from anybody, supported himself as a photographer and connected over 1,100 children with their families. He was the informal connector. And another story, remarkable people. All of these people are unbelievably remarkable. There's another story of a man who is in here in the on top right above Doug, who was, whose last name was Gallipop, and he got a PhD in ancient Khmer Buddhism. And he was he was working in Site 2, which had 187,000 people in it, one of the refugee camps that I visited. And he didn't expect to provide a missing link in the history of Khmer Buddhism, but all of the 60,000 of the 62,000 Buddhist monks had been killed or disappeared as a result of the Khmer Rouge. And so the young novitiates in Site 2 who wanted to learn Khmer Buddhism had no way to learn about that history. And Peter had made all these videotapes about that history, so he brought them with him, and they were using them to provide a missing link in the education of the next generation of Buddhist monks. So remarkable, remarkable people in this tenuous thread of cultural perpetuation. Wonderful, wonderful stories. And in this part of the installation, I have this output image of a Buddhist of a Buddha that was at Angkor Thom, and at the Bayonne in one of the temples, one of the latter temples, and I also had two books. I made one book that described my odyssey at trying to find Buddhist monks, because I wanted to understand what had happened to them as a result of the Indochina Wars. So one book was dedicated to my experiences with the Buddhists, both in Thailand, Cambodia, and then in the United States. I had remarkable experiences that I didn't expect to have. And the other book was a recreation of the letters that I got from people who had been in the refugee camps and then returned home. And embedded in those letters is a description of the odyssey that they had taken and what their lives were like and what their dilemmas were like as a result of living in the camps and trying to make a life back in Cambodia. So I made a book of those letters that were testimony to that lived experience. The second show that I'll very briefly describe, and that's the one that's going to be at Vassar, is at Vassar right now, is called Hmong in Transition. And this is a long work. I've been working on it since 1990, and this view is not the view that in any way is being exhibited anymore, but I'm showing it to you. It was originally how I configured part one of the show. The show has 4 parts: refugee camps, United States, Laos, and Thailand. And so this part includes the 5 by 10 foot embroidery that I bought in Fresno, and it includes this book that I wrote with a Hmong refugee, Ko Chang's story. After I got home from the Hmong camps, the person who had been my guide in one of the camps, Ko Chang, sent me his autobiography. He was a very unusual person. He had lived in the camps most of his life. He had learned to read and write 5 languages, and Hmong is a pre-literate culture. It wasn't originally. It had a written language, but the Chinese forbade them to read or write it, and so they lost it in about 1800, and so they don't read or write, and they have to commit most of their culture and history to memory. But Ku did know how to read and write, and he sent me his autobiography. I mocked it up into a better book format because I thought it was too important a document to just hang on to myself. I wanted to share it, so I sent it to the Visual Studies Workshop National Book Contest and didn't hear from them for a long time and figured that I wouldn't hear from them. And then I got a letter saying we'd won the contest. So Ku and I got to write our book and publish it, and through the Visual Studies Workshop. And so this is the cover of that book. And these are, so I reconfigured part 1 of the show to be matrices of images from the camps. And one of the things that I realized when looking back on my photos of the camps is that I had only been allowed to spend a couple of days in each of the camps. I really had a veneer experience. I didn't have a deep experience, but I was able to see as much as I possibly could in those few days that they allowed me in the camps. So my pictures reflect that, and a lot of times I was horrified that I was making such beautiful pictures of these camps, and because they looked gorgeous to me, and the people looked strong and vigorous, and so so I wanted to present something about what the camps looked like, but I knew very well that the history itself was tough. It was a really very difficult history. And the Hmong who poured out of Laos from 1975 on were the Hmong who had allied themselves with the royalist regime and the CIA, and the Hmong who stayed in Laos were the Hmong who had allied themselves in the conflict with the Pathet Lao. And so everybody who was in the camps had had a really tough time and were survivors, true survivors. So I wanted to tell the history of what had happened to them as a counterpoint to the images that I provided. So I did use the text between these images to give testimony to that history. So a few of the images that I included. I went to a shamanic healing of a child and photographed that ritual. And then I used a lot of the images from the camps in the second part of the artwork that I ultimately produced, because the second part was then following Ku's family from the time they arrived in the United States in Fresno, to Ku and his family trying to get jobs and not being able to find work in Fresno, and being victimized by American gangs, and so having to leave and go to North Carolina, and then finding work there. And so what I was trying to do was to create a dialogue with history, where I interviewed Ku and his family and transcribed those interviews and included those interviews in two images that juxtaposed ideas in some way. Sometimes I juxtaposed then and now, in the sense that the background of this image is the Mekong, and the smaller inset image is Ku's cousin describing how he saved Ku and his family by pulling them across the Mekong, swimming across the Mekong, and what that was like, right? So he tells that whole story, right? So I do try to create an idea about history in this way. And that was the strategy that I used in the second part of the show, where this image is Ku, the bigger image is Ku and his family as I photographed them in 1990 in the refugee camp, and the lower right image is Ku and his family in 1997, a picture he sent to me where they're standing on the front step of their little house in Hickory, North Carolina. Only 7 years separate these two images, and I thought the contrast was pretty extraordinary. And Ma is telling what it was like to try to date Ku in the story, right? And here Ku is standing in front of his Cracker Jack, a small apartment house in Fresno, where I first saw him in the United States, in one of the costumes that he designed for his martial arts performances in the refugee camp. And he's talking about his hopes and dreams to be an illustrator. And then in the lower right corner is a picture of the factory where he was working in North Carolina, inspecting automatic motors for car windows, right? So it is this kind of interesting odyssey where he's talking about his hopes and dreams and then what he ends up doing, right? This is Ma working in an electronics factory, talking about her life. His wife, that's Ku's wife. And this is the larger picture is a picture of the vegetable market in the refugee camp. The smaller one is Walmart in Hickory and North Carolina. And Ma says that she can't afford to shop at the Walmart. She buys her clothes at the 99-cent store, right? To give testimony to history of some kind, and to a lot of times to ask questions about then and now, there and here, so on. Ma buying rice in the small picture and in the large picture what most people have to do in order to winnow that rice, which is a long and arduous process when they're raising it themselves. This is Ku's brother, Chua, standing by his car named Angels. And Chua is talking about being both a Buddhist and being, being an animist and being a Catholic, and how each of them gives him something special in his life. Bao Chang and her family lived in Statesville, and she had spent most of her life in the United States, was the only member of the family to have a BA from an American college, and was an accountant. And I asked her what kind of medicine she practices, and she said, well, of course I practice Western medicine, but she said, I'll tell you a story. She said, you know, I got a skin condition which was so itchy and uncomfortable and all over my body that for a solid year I couldn't sleep. And I went to every doctor in Statesville I could find. We tried every medical practice we could, and none of them worked for me. So I then went to Fresno to see my mother, and my mom said, honey, well, have you been to see the shaman? And Bao said, no, I haven't. And she said, well, you've tried everything else. Let's go to the shaman. And so they went to the shaman, and the shaman says, you need to go and get a live chicken and come back. And Bao said, well, you know, a live chicken was a lot cheaper than a Western doctor. So she went to get a chicken and came back, and the shaman did a ritual. He said that her soul had left its body, and she needed to send the soul that had occupied her body back to the gods so that her soul could re-enter her body. And so they sacrificed the chicken, and she left the ritual, and her skin condition went away. So, you know, these are the kinds of interesting stories that I was getting. One of the things in following the Hmong that I was curious about was how do they keep the tenacity of their culture intact, given the fact that they don't have any written materials, they don't have a spiritual leader, they don't have edifices of any kind that are shared cultural edifices. How do they do it? And so I asked Ku, and he said, it is through the clan and the family. We believe in a strong family. If we have that, we can make our children understand Hmong principles. And I said, but where do you get Hmong principles? And he said, from my mother and father. So he was trying to, so I was just very interested in how that cultural identity gets transmitted. People doing embroidery in the refugee camps, and the larger picture, this woman sewing 12 dozen sock toes an hour in her garage in Hickory, North Carolina. Both sewing pictures, but very different. And while I was there, the family wanted to do a ritual for me, and they and I was quite concerned. They said, well, about 75 people are going to come over here for lunch at about 1 o'clock today. It was 10 in the morning, and I didn't see a thing happening. And I said, well, can I help? And they said, no, we got it under control. Well, very shortly after this army of people started pouring in and rolling up their sleeves and making this huge banquet for this lunch. And while the women were doing that, while the guys were in the garage schmoozing, and so they made this extraordinary. They do this all the time. It's something where somebody in this huge extended family goes and has a ritual one day of a weekend, and the rest of the people come over and make it. And it's very, very extraordinary. So this is, in the large picture, I was invited to the ritual lunch after the shamanic healing in the refugee camp, and the table looked like this. And and then the table on the inset is the ritual for me that happened in Hickory, North Carolina, and the tables look very similar. The thing that was starting to happen, and I'll comment more about this in a minute, is that they had cooked every bit of the sacrificed pig and chicken, and that's what they were eating in the stew at the refugee camp. In this insight picture, they'd gone to Charlotte and gotten a roasted pig, and it was all cut up and ready to serve. and that was in the center of the table. Ritual sacrifice was an integral part of their culture, and I want to talk about that in just a minute. But I did want you to see how they recreate this shared cultural meal that becomes a very important part of their experience. This is a larger picture is taken from a plane when I was flying from between Vientiane and Pont-Savan. I was going up to Pont-Savan to see the Plain of Jars and to talk to Hmong people in that area. And that was one of the most heavily bombed areas in Laos. It's hard to realize this, but Laos is the most heavily bombed country in the world. The U.S. and Great Britain dropped more bombs on it than they dropped during all of World War II, and 30% of them did not explode. So today they have a great problem with unexploded ordnance in Laos. So the man in the inside is the head of the Hmong community in North Carolina. There are 18 clans, and he is the head of them. And he's telling his story in the text, and he's standing with his wife in front of their automobile, and it says visitor on the pavement, which I liked, and after a Hmong meeting. So I took this picture, and again, the time separating when the bombing took place, that was in the early 1970s, and this picture was taken in about 1999. And here he is again leading this Hmong meeting of clan people, and the woman in the inside on the left, the women on the right are making the coffee and the tea. There's no women at this table of clan leaders except this woman on the left, and she's saying that it's really crucial for women to become a voice and a functioning part of the clan system in the United States. And then we have the same person in his home, where on his wall in his living room were pictures of the American planes that had dropped all the bombs in Laos, and I got interested that he would have pictures of those planes in his living room. And in Pont-Savan in Laos, I photographed this display of the remnants of those bombs that were outside of my hotel. And I also had an opportunity in Fresno to interview Ku's father on the right. Ku's father had been the head of the Hmong, all of the Hmong in Laos. And here he was alone in living with his second wife in this cracker box apartment with very little else in the apartment, and feeling very isolated and longing to be back home in Laos among his people and having a proper place in a community, which he didn't have in Fresno. So that's what I wrote in the one area on the right. On the left is Ma's father. Ma is Ku's wife. I ultimately went to Laos in 2000 to try to follow the family, Ku's family and Ma's family, who had not immigrated to the United States, because I was trying to understand the larger geopolitical reality. And Ma's father sent an audio tape to Ma, and I didn't know what he was asking, but later they translated it. And what Ma's father is saying to Ma is, if you love me, if you remember what a great father I was for you when you were growing up and how much I took care of you, then you'll send me $2,000 so I can buy a tractor. Right, and so Ma's father was also, and he was saying that he was discontent with his life in Laos and how hard it was. So the two fathers were feeling that life was tough on them, but for very different reasons. And I juxtaposed the life experience of those two fathers. Then I did go to Laos to try to track down the story of the people in Ku's family and Ma's family that didn't immigrate, because I realized that if I could tell the story of the members of Ku's and Ma's family, I could sort of tell the story of what happened to people after the Indochina Wars. I could sort of use that as an armature to tell this bigger story. And so I went to Laos. I had many, many experiences. I finally did find Ku's father, Ma's father, and went to his land in the mountains. And this is the village that he lives in. That is his buffalo. And interviewed his father and Ma's brother. And those were the people who had been in refugee camps and then returned to their home village. And so that's what that village looked like. I then went to another village of refugees who had lived in the refugee camps until 1992 when they had been repatriated against their will. And that village, the Laotian government had just placed those people in the most remote and difficult and unarable areas of Laos, and these people were the poorest people I met, and it was sort of reprisals for their fighting against them during the war, and these men are telling their stories of what happened to them as Hmong refugees. And this is inside the hut. It's freezing cold this day, and the only source of heat is these pieces of wood that you see, and this is the mom making a lunch for everybody, barefoot in this freezing house. And this is the interior of the house. Very, very, very poor and very difficult life experience for the people who fought with the CIA and the Royalists. By contrast, I went to another village, and ultimately the story kept broadening as I began to understand the dimensional experience of different Hmong, given what their relationship was to the government during the war. So in this case, this village was a socialist communist village that had allied themselves with the Pathet Lao. It was an intact village, and actually at this point the government, the Laotian government, was trying to get those villagers to move out of it and come down to the city. Many of them had come to Luang Prabang and become more capitalist oriented rather than stayed in a socialist communist environment. This is the typical Hmong architecture in remote villages. In Luang Prabang, I again met a whole spectrum of people, and one of them was this man who had been allied with the Pathet Lao during the war, and after the war, the Russians had come to the Laotian government, the newly formed Laotian government, and offered scholarships for people to go to Moscow and study. So he went there for 5 years and studied radio, cinema, and telecommunication systems and brought that information back to Laos. Ultimately, the Laotian government was so poor that it couldn't make use of his expertise, and he ended up opening a bakery. And this was a very successful bakery in Luang Prabang. He was the most urbane and successful Hmong person I met. Down the street from that bakery in Luang Prabang was an area where the women were doing their embroidery. The Laotian government had forbidden the Hmong to wear their traditional outfits in this urban context of Vientiane, Pansavan, Luang Prabang. And then they discovered that those people were a tourist attraction. And so then the women started congregating in the main square of Luang Prabang, and the government allowed them to do that. And so this square is filled with women embroidering these Hmong patterns for sale, and this they support their family. So I got to know this woman, and I went to her house in the suburbs of this town, a small house. Their little girl was peeking in at me while I was interviewing the family, holding her dolly, holding her blonde, blue-eyed Barbie. And I got very interested in the fact that that image is spreading itself so fundamentally. Even in Laos, that was the image, that was the kind of doll that the kids could buy in the marketplace, right? So, and then when I went to Pansavan in the north, I went to many Hmong villages, and those villages had allied themselves with the Pathet Lao, not because the people were particularly political, but because they had no choice for the most part. The Pathet Lao had come down from Vietnam, and so they had to help them or die. And throughout Pansavan and many of the other cities were posters that were made by MAG, the Mines Advisory Group, that was out of Great Britain, trying to reclaim the land. The spread of ordnance throughout the land was a huge problem because a great percentage of the farmland in Laos is not arable. And so they were very proud of the fact that their mine clearing operation every year was making arable 125 acres of land. You have to understand that millions of acres are not arable in Laos, and they're proud of this feat. And so these are posters trying to educate the Laotians on various what to do and not to do in the face of finding these bombs. There's all kinds of them. I have like dozens of pictures of these. I only included a couple here. Now, the irony of ironies is that I went back to Luang Prabang and took a ride up the Mekong, spent the day, and one of the places, and the reason I did it was to go to see this Hmong village that was along the Mekong. Now, the Laotian government that had originally tried to subdue the culture of the Hmong had actually ultimately set up this Hmong village along as a tourist site. And so they had gotten the people to build traditional houses and move there. And these are people that were now part of that effort on the part of the Laotian government. It was kind of an irony of history. So these are some of the people doing demonstration projects on how you make a thatched roof and so on. And my guide, let me see if there's any more. No, my guide in that village had said that they were about to open a coffee house here. So I'm watching this evolution of this culture, morphize before my very eyes, and it was sort of extraordinary. I then went to Thailand and went to the University of Chiang Mai to the native cultural center. It's not called Native, it's something else, and I forgot the name of it, but I met a Hmong woman who's getting her master's degree at the University of Chiang Mai. She took me to see her grandparents in the hills of Nan, a province in northern Thailand, and their story was very different. Her family had been the very first family to come, Hmong family to come to Thailand, and they had brought other people with them. They were the very first family to learn to read and write Thai. They had been a very powerful and intellectual family. And this is her grandmother doing classical batik in her an outside covered area. And behind her is a batiking vat full of the chemicals that you need. She's putting wax on fabric right now, and this woman is sewing in her little hut in the village as well, sewing traditional Hmong designs for sale. This is typical of the architecture and traditional villages in Thailand. And then I was taken to another village of revolutionaries. They were Hmong revolutionaries who, during the 1970s, had lived in the mountains of northern Laos, and in that case they were fighting the Thai military because the Thai government had treated the Hmong so poorly that they had waged such a successful campaign that the Thai government buckled in the early 80s and told them if they would stop the war and come out of the mountains that they would not have reprisals and that they would give them land for houses and for farming. And they did that. And so this was the mother who, I have pictures of her with a shotgun because this woman was one of those fighters in the 70s, a very, very powerful woman, and now living in a farming community in northern Thailand. So I got the dimensional picture of the Hmong story both in Laos and in Thailand, and this is the mom cooking in her kitchen. This and one last village that I went to in Thailand was called Wat Tham Krabak, and this village was probably worse than any refugee camp that I saw. It was unbelievably poor. The Thais would not allow the people to work except at subsistence jobs, and they had no rights at all in the Thai culture. And so these are a few shots where the only way they can make money for the most part is to do sewing. River of sewage in the camp. And all of this is adjacent to this Thai community, temple community, right next door. And so this was one of the temples. And I really, if I had time, I could just tell you stories about this. But it was a very remarkable juxtaposition of cultures in this magnificent, beautifully overgrown jungle environment. The last image in this series that I'm showing you is an image taken in Santa Barbara. The woman from the University of Chiang Mai moved to Santa Barbara and married a Hmong man there and invited me to come up to meet the family, and I did. And again, the family I didn't expect this at all. They had done a ceremonial ritual to honor my coming there. And they had made classical Hmong food, only in this case they had, you see, I had seen the whole series, all of the evolution of animal sacrifice from the refugee camps to villages in Laos to Sacramento, California. I'd seen animal sacrifice. Then I had seen the ritual in Hickory, North Carolina, where they hadn't sacrificed the animal. They just bought a whole animal ready to eat. And in this case, in Santa Barbara, they had gone to Costco and gotten a pork loin. And so again, before my very eyes, I'm watching the evolution of the culture and how it unfolds. And I juxtapose the family, this huge family that lives in this nice 3-bedroom house where each one of these families has many, many children, and each whole family occupies 1 bedroom of this 3-bedroom house, and they use the shared space as communal space to eat and play and do other things in. And the grandmother standing in the middle of the image is the one who does a lot of the cooking, and she raises herbs in the backyard, and she makes these pandao, these sewings, embroideries. And I looked at the tenacity of that work because it is indeed spectacular in its perfection. And to realize a human being made it is beyond belief. And I asked her, was it harder for her to work and do electronics assembly work, or was it harder for her to do this embroidery? And she said the embroidery was harder by far. And that I really began to feel that there was something about the tenacity of that spiral that was a metaphor for the incredible strength of that culture. It was embedded in the power of that spiral. It symbolized the strength of that culture. I'm going to go on very quickly. I'm sorry, what time is it?
6 o'clock.
Should I stop? Or would you like me, because I could continue a little longer, but do you need to stop? A little more?
Entertain some questions.
Sure. I could stop here. Yeah.
And then go
Shall
on.
I? Okay, questions? Yeah.
Where is the...
Oh, that's not it. Okay, let me just go on for a few more minutes. And I have a lot of, I'll quickly go through these. Another project, a documentary project that I did, I was given the opportunity to photograph tribal people in the deserts of Baluchistan. And I have a whole project of my own photography, but I am not showing you that. I'm showing you the work that they did. I brought 12 disposable cameras with me, and you have to understand I'm way out 2 hours from any urban center in this very isolated desert. And I brought these cameras with me, and I'd gotten to know the people in this one desert community. And I handed out the cameras, and I demonstrate how you have to push the button on the front to activate the flash, and then you have to advance the take-up reel, and then you have to push the button and every time you take a picture. And I'm kind of pantomiming this because I can't speak to them. And they did it. And they really understood. And these are people that don't have cameras. They've never used them. They almost have no technology that is Western technology. And so I'm showing you their pictures because I got very interested in how good they were at framing. Most of the pictures were taken by the women because I was mainly focusing on them in the study. And I began to hypothesize. I'll show you their pictures. Like, for instance, this one where they're showing all aspects of chapati making in one frame, right? And, anybody who's ever tried to do photography like this knows how difficult it is to do that. And so I'll just show you their pictures briefly. Oh. And I actually showed these just yesterday to my intro photo class to say, I would die if I could get an intro photo class to take pictures as good as these pictures. Their very first roll of film, they didn't have another opportunity after this. And they're just like spectacular. So I made this hypothesis that the women are not allowed to learn to read and write in that culture. And what they are allowed to do is embroider for their entire childhood. And what they must do is learn very complicated stitches in behalf of embroidering the front of their dress, the back of their dress, the sleeves, the pants, the cuffs, everything. They have to imagine all of this before they put the needle into the fabric. And I decided that I think that the rigor, that mental rigor of having to imagine so clearly resulted in their being able to take these pictures. And that in our culture, my students have memory on their computer and in books, and they don't have to do that. And they don't develop this mental imaging process the way the people in the tribal communities do. So that's my hypothesis from all of that. And I'll go through these really quickly. Just to show you kind of ways to deal with documentary ideas, where a whole group of us were doing a project about the history of the garment industry in Los Angeles, and put up installations in 11 storefronts in downtown LA adjacent to the garment industry, and put that history in English and in Spanish so that everybody could read it. And we're starting from the early 20th century, and we all worked on these windows together. The whole group. It was a collaborative project. So this was another documentary project and a way to approach documentary in a very dimensional way. And then my own extension of that was to go to Thailand and photograph in sweatshops in Thailand. And then I had a show in a university in Bangkok, and then a show in Los Angeles, comparing the garment industry in Thailand with the garment industry in Los Angeles. And so in Thailand, I found the covers of these two magazines with a Western-looking and a Euro-looking, or an Asian-looking model, and surrounded those images of those magazines with the sweatshops that had made the kinds of things that they were advertising. And that was one piece. Another piece was a letter to Tiger Wood that had appeared in a newspaper in Thai, and then I got a translation of it in English, because Tiger Wood is the poster boy for Nike, and Nike had closed their manufacturing facility in Bangkok, laying off 1,300 workers because they didn't want them to unionize. And so these are people protesting that, and these are the protest letters to Tiger Wood. And I got a present while I was there, which was, I was wondering why I didn't see any pictures of Tiger Woods in the newspapers and magazines, or in the Nike ads. And then I was looking down at the newspaper, and there on the front of the newspaper, in a news article, was a picture of Tiger Wood. He had just won another golf tournament, and so the bottom picture is from that newspaper of Tiger Wood. And so they didn't really have to, and he wearing his Nike hat, right? So they didn't really have to advertise him in Thailand, you know. He was just in the newspaper wearing his Nike clothes. And then a shirt that I bought at a factory that was a knockoff factory in Bangkok, where they're making Prada. Now this shirt cost $1.80. And I bought one, and then I have pictures. It was an exact replica of a Prada shirt, and then I bought pictures of the people making it and put it on the front of the shirt. Across the room from that, I had pictures from downtown LA and the sweatshops downtown. It is impossible to get into these buildings. Los Angeles is the largest garment manufacturing area in the United States, and it's impenetrable. It's a no man's land. There's not pictures of it. You're not allowed to go into these buildings, but I kind of did. I could tell you stories about it. But one of the ways that I wanted to show this is to take off one of the walls of the building and show what was inside. So I put one of those pictures on the wall. Or I put it in the sky, because this was the area, and with a Rampage ad below it. And then I found that the garment workers were protesting in Phnom Penh and in Los Angeles. They were protesting about the same issues. So I put a map of Los Angeles and a map of Phnom Penh. They're very similar in scale and size, and in size, not scale. And the only thing that's different in the text is the name of the city. One is in Cambodia, the other is Los Angeles, and both in the same year, both the same issues. A couple more documentary projects really quickly, because this is, I'll just show you how I approached it. Another sight unseen project was Mami Abu Jamal, the issues surrounding his incarceration. So I took one aspect of the trial that was in question. I described the problems with the trial itself, the issues of Mumia Abu Jamal, and every single panel is devoted to another aspect of the trial that was problematic. And above and below that text, I put images from the history of African Americans in the United States. So that is describing the issues. That is Abu Mumia Jamal. And that's Martin Luther King, and another aspect of what was problem with the media and the representation of this case. Another sight unseen was called the Prison Industrial Complex. I discovered that there are all kinds of things made in prisons in California, and I got a book of those things, and nobody knew that they were being made in prisons, and they were high-octane office furniture because all the state and Cal State University offices had to be appointed with furniture from the prison industrial complex by law. They had to buy them from the prison system, and people weren't aware of that. So I was like flabbergasted. So I just filled this huge wall with images from that book. And in the middle, I discovered in that book they also were making American flags in the prison. So in the middle, I have this picture that was in the book. All I was doing was copying it, and I say made by prisoners in a California prison. Right. So that's another approach to the documentary that I have. And two more small projects. One is about sight unseen museum guards, where I was realizing that they were anonymous. We don't even think about them when we're going to museums. So I photographed them at the LA County Museum and interviewed them about their experiences in the museum. I had to use ISO 3200 film, and the film was so gritty that, but they ended up looking better in negative, and the people looked like ghosts, and I thought that was an appropriate metaphor for the fact that they are kind of like ghosts in that environment. So these are a few of those images from that series. And at LACMA, they also have a Statue of Liberty in a little case and mock-up, and a maquette. And I thought it was particularly ironic, especially since they had dissolved the labor unions for the guards and wouldn't allow them to unionize at LACMA. And so I put the description of that evolution from union to non-union on top of the Statue of Liberty in that series. And the last piece is my Tongva mural, where I worked with Native Americans for a couple of years, learning about their relationship to nature and putting together this 32-foot mural that shows their relationship of nature throughout the year, starting on the left from winter solstice, and then spring equinox, summer solstice in the middle, fall equinox, and winter solstice on the right, and all the plants that come into various stages of development at different phases of the year, and how the Native Americans make use of those plants. So another way to do a documentary project. So I'll stop here. And so are there some questions? I did this on my computer. I have, and I ended up buying an Epson 7600 computer and was able to output it on that in tiles and modules, and then mounted it.
You don't have any details.
I don't. I can. I should include them. Yeah. Yes.
Which tribe or tribes did you work with in this piece?
You know, the library was in Sherman Oaks, and in the Los Angeles basin, the Tongva are the tribal community that occupied that whole area. And their Spanish given name was the Gabrielinos, but they call themselves the Tongva. So I was working with them.
They still have an enclave there?
They do. They say that there's 5,000 people who identify themselves as Tongva at this time. But at the turn of the century, the Smithsonian thought that it was an extinct tribe. And actually, there is this story that somebody from the tribe went to the Smithsonian, I don't know at what point, and asked about the Gabrielinos, and they said, well, they're extinct. And he said, well, you know, I am one. And the person at the Smithsonian said, well, you know, you must be wrong because our anthropologists have really researched this. And so it was an interesting thing. But at this point, people are reclaiming their heritage, their Native American heritage. They went underground after the missions were closed, and they kind of disappeared, and then they are now resurfacing and claiming their identity, their heritage. Yep, no.
You had mentioned to me, I haven't seen this, but you said that in combination with this part of the mural, you also have photographs of contemporary inhabitants of Sherman Oaks holding things that they
Yeah,
value.
right.
How does that work in terms of the library?
Actually, this is only part of what's on that wall. On this wall, there below it, in 3 strips, are close-ups of a lot of their artifacts. And then on the wall on the other side, the Tongva artifacts. So that there are enlargements, a lot of the things that are in the mural. And then on the other side of the room and to the right are a whole series of photographs of people from the Sherman Oaks area holding things that they treasure from their culture. And then I asked them each to write about their hopes and dreams and greatest fears. And so an image of a person holding something and then they're writing, so I could create a dialogue about the things that people treasure from those 2 cultures.
And that's a permanent part of
Yeah.
the installation as well. Can you characterize that dialogue at all, or would you venture to do that?
It was very interesting. I never knew what people were going to bring. They brought a lot of family photos that they treasured more than anything else in their life. So that was very interesting to me.
As opposed to the Tonga?
As opposed to the Tongva. Yeah, the Tongva, of course, I didn't ask them to do the same thing. I just had, but I saw that because I'd seen a lot of the Tongva, and I asked to photograph their material culture and what they treasured. So they were treasuring things from the earth that were useful to them. It was a very interesting experience to do this because I didn't realize that I was going to have the marvelous experience of spending protracted periods of time with Native Americans wandering through nature and learning about it from their perspective. And what I began to experience was that the dualistic idea of nature culture just evaporated when I did that, right? Because that dualism doesn't exist if you're actually living as a part of the land and using every bit of whatever you can that comes out of nature. So that recognition of what that feels like was an unexpected bonus in this project. But I can't I don't want to. I didn't do a research study of, the 2.
Emerges by looking.
Yeah, yeah. Before, yes.
I was just wondering where I might see a copy of that mural.
In Sherman Oaks, California. Yeah, it's in the permanently installed in Sherman Oaks Library. It's also on the Cultural Affairs Department of the City of Los Angeles website.
Oh,
Yeah.
Did you get to send pictures back to the women who were taken in the desert community?
Every day, I would go back to Quetta and get the film developed, make prints, and take them back and give it to them.
What was the response?
A great story. So
You're talking about
in Pakistan, yeah, in the tribal communities, and they had never seen pictures. That was the only group that had the only tribal community that allowed me to photograph the face of women. It's not allowed in Pakistan, especially tribal women. But it was also the only tribal group that, while I was there, they got a class for the adult women to learn to read and write for the first time. And that's a big deal because the women aren't allowed to learn to read and write. And they know the minute women learn to read and write, their culture is going to change. And so I passed out these pictures because they'd never seen a picture of themselves before. And we're sitting in this group, and I'm trying to take the moment, right, when they're first seeing themselves in a photograph, right? And I can't get it. I just like keep trying, and it's not really the right picture. Then this one girl who really's got this photo head jumped in. She's holding her picture like this and giving me her profile, and right in front of my camera and looking at her picture. That was the picture I wanted. And she could imagine what it was I was trying to do and could imagine what it looked like from my perspective and then give it to me, right? And I'm not able to talk to her at all, right? So it was very extraordinary, the brilliant, the intelligence of people that you discover. I mean, it's sort of like mind. It's sort of like, you know, understanding that this tenacity of mind is the same no matter where you go. And the weavings of in those communities have an extraordinary, complicated warp and weft pattern. It's the women who do those weavings, and they have to hold this mathematical complexity of the warp and weft in their minds in order to accomplish a design that goes this way at the same time that a design goes this way. And again, it would seem to be like, you know, like the complexity of a piece of music that's so intensely complicated, and that the women were doing it as an integral part of what they did. So again, it's the development of mind in a lot of different ways, and I broadened my understanding of how that could happen from that experience. So.
Was it difficult for the mom to immigrate from whether it was Thailand to California?
Was it difficult legally or for them personally?
Legally. Well, personally, I'm sure it's a complete change, but legally, and whether that had anything to do with you after you came.
I didn't even know they were going to do it. And what happened was the Thai government wanted to close the refugee camps. And so there were some Hmong who did not want to immigrate, and they stayed in those camps, and those were the Hmong who were forcibly repatriated to Laos. The Hmongs who agreed to immigrate did it voluntarily, and they were given that opportunity by the UNHCR, the United Nations and the other organizations overseeing. And they could have gone to many countries. Like there is a diaspora. Some of Ku's family, they're all over the United States. They weren't put in the one spot. And there's some that are in France, some that are in, I think, in Canada, and some in Australia. So there's all over. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for such a